Hello, welcome to Book Journey. Today, we are going to explore Argonauts of the Western Pacific, a book that has stood the test of time and can be regarded as a classic among classics. When it was first published a century ago, it was groundbreaking and laid the foundation for scientific fieldwork, a methodology that is still in use today and remains a must-read in the fields of sociology and anthropology. I remember struggling to get through it during my academic years. Speaking of the author, Bronislaw Malinowski, you might not be familiar with him, but you have probably heard of his famous Chinese student, Fei Xiaotong. You may have read Fei's works, Peasant Life in China and Chinese Peasant Life, which were written under Malinowski's guidance, employing the research methods and attitudes outlined in this book. In particular, Fei's later proposition of the 16-character maxim for handling relationships between different cultures, appreciate one's own beauty, admire others' beauty, share beauty together, and achieve universal harmony, is not only a result of Fei's profound understanding of Chinese culture, but also inspired by his teacher's emphasis on seeing the world through others' eyes. From now on, let's follow Fei's affectionate nickname for his mentor and simply refer to Malinowski as Mr. Ma. Before delving into the content of the book, let me share a little story featuring Mr. Ma and the islanders he studied in the Western Pacific. A century ago, some of these islanders still practiced cannibalism. They would raid other islands by boat, specifically to hunt for heads and capture prisoners. The following part might be a bit unsettling, so brace yourself. Headhunting involved killing members of other tribes and turning their heads into trophies. As for the prisoners, regardless of gender, many were likely consumed. Of course, some tribes practiced endocannibalism, eating their own deceased relatives, believing that this would allow the soul and body to rest in peace. But regardless, these customs would certainly be considered barbaric rather than civilized by our standards. At that time, Mr. Ma, in his 20s and full of youthful vigor, was professionally trained and unafraid of cannibals, living and dining with them. It was during World War I, and Mr. Ma was partly conducting research locally and partly stranded due to the war, unable to return to Europe. He spent his days living among the villagers, gradually becoming well acquainted with the indigenous people. There is a legend that one day, while chatting with the locals about the ongoing war in his homeland, which had claimed thousands of lives, the indigenous people were utterly shocked. They quickly asked him how they could possibly consume so many people. He hastily denied it, saying, "No, Europeans do not eat people." The locals were even more astonished, questioning why they would kill so many people if they did not eat them. To them, this seemed incredibly barbaric. While the authenticity of the story cannot be guaranteed, it aptly reflects a central idea of the book, observing the possibilities of life and the world from the unique perspectives of various different cultures. In other words, we need to learn to change our perspective and reflect on the world we take for granted. Cannibals may be barbaric, but non-cannibals are not necessarily always more civilized. The commonalities between us and them are greater than we might imagine. With that, let's conclude the introduction. The original book is detailed and somewhat cumbersome to read. I will first focus on the exotic cultures depicted in the book, summarizing their worldview and highlighting the similarities to our own lives. Then, I will outline the complete methodology proposed in the book and discuss its impact, such as how Fei Xiaotong applied Mr. Ma's methods to influence China. Of course, we should start with a brief introduction to the time and place of the study. The research site is, of course, in the Western Pacific, specifically in a large archipelago to the east of Papua New Guinea, off the northeastern coast of Australia. Between 1914 and 1918, Mr. Ma visited this region 3 times to conduct what he called ethnographic surveys, which later became known as fieldwork. The hallmark of this type of survey is that it requires the researcher to go to the field, live long-term with the indigenous people, and collect a large amount of material. We will discuss the specific methods of fieldwork later. For now, remember that Mr. Ma's 3 surveys, except for the first one, which lasted only a few months, each lasted a full year and yielded a wealth of valuable material. Returning to this archipelago, it can actually be divided into several distinct cultural areas. Some tribes have chiefs, while others have councils of elders. In some places, there is no practice of cannibalism, and warfare with other tribes is quite chivalrous, with rules and regulations. In contrast, some areas not only practice cannibalism, but also raid other tribes specifically for the purpose of eating people. Despite their diverse characteristics, these people all belong to a circle called the Kula Ring. The Kula Ring is a form of exchange between islands and tribes. If you are part of the circle, you may receive 2 specific types of gifts. One is a white shell arm bracelet, and the other is a red shell necklace. These specialized Kula gifts also have a fixed direction of movement and can only be sent in a specific direction around the circle formed by these islands. The necklace moves in a clockwise direction, while the arm bracelet moves counterclockwise. When a person receives an arm bracelet, they will reciprocate with a necklace, and vice versa. Mr. Ma vividly explained, at any point in the Kula Ring, if a person stands facing the center of the circle, the arm bracelet they receive with their left hand and the necklace with their right hand will then be passed on. Moreover, if you receive a Kula gift, you cannot just keep it to yourself. After a while, you must pass it on to one of your Kula partners in exchange for another item. They have a saying, once in Kula, always in Kula, which means that once you and your Kula partner have exchanged gifts, you are bound together forever. After a period of time, you must exchange gifts again. For these gifts, once they enter the Kula Ring, they will continue to circulate within it. If a gift is kept for too long, people around will gossip, saying that the person is stingy and difficult to deal with. Furthermore, not just anyone can participate in the Kula exchange, as collecting the specific shells used to make these ornaments is dangerous, and the processing is quite laborious. Only a select group of men have the opportunity to join the Kula exchange. Once you become partners, it is as if you have an adopted brother. You must remember to exchange gifts and help each other when visiting each other's villages. Moreover, for those cannibals, they certainly do not eat their Kula partners. You might wonder, what are these Kula gifts used for? First and foremost, they are exquisite ornaments. The indigenous people wear these ornaments at grand feasts and large gatherings attended by multiple tribes, serving a similar function to our haute couture. Most of the time, the indigenous people either consider these gifts too valuable to wear, or find the arm bracelets too small, or the necklaces too cumbersome for everyday use, so they are simply kept at home. For them, the value lies in possessing the item, which brings them prestige. The author gives a similar example of the jewelry of European nobility, which is mostly locked in safes and serves as a family heirloom. I can also give a Chinese example. These arm bracelets and necklaces are like official kiln porcelain. In terms of their form, they have practical uses, but if someone were to drink from an official kiln cup, unless they are the emperor, everyone would consider it a waste. Their true value lies not in being used, but in being possessed. For instance, Emperor Kangxi liked to bestow official kiln porcelain on nobles or ministers as a sign of favor. In the author's words, the purpose of possessing them is possession itself, and the ownership and the prestige derived from it are the main sources of their value. The difference is, as mentioned earlier, in the Kula Ring, gifts cannot be kept indefinitely, but must circulate perpetually. Each item moves in one direction, neither reversing course nor being permanently owned. Moreover, if a gift is of superior quality or has been owned by a legendary figure, it will be given a special name. The prestige value of these treasures increases as they continuously circulate and are possessed, becoming symbols of rank and status. There are 2 very important principles of the Kula that are easily understood by the Chinese. The first principle is that a return gift must be given, but not immediately. It must be delayed. They particularly avoid making the kula seem vulgar by turning it into a mere transaction of goods. They criticize those who mishandle the steps of kula, making it seem like ordinary barter. The second principle is that the return gift should be of roughly equivalent value. However, there is an unwritten rule. Whether it is truly equivalent is not openly discussed but is judged internally. If someone receives a valuable gift and reciprocates with an inferior item, they will be considered stingy, and they will also lose face. So, why maintain this circle? Mr. Ma said it is because the circle serves an alliance function. Think about it, these islands are so far apart, with different languages, and some even want to eat their neighbors. If each island were to isolate itself, development would be very difficult. In fact, in many tribes that participate in the kula, almost all the long-distance canoes are made for the purpose of kula voyages. Through the incentive of participating in the kula, and the endless exchange of seemingly valueless items, the kula circle connects tens of thousands of indigenous people separated by hundreds of kilometers, promoting the circulation of people and goods, and forming a large-scale alliance system between tribes with very clear responsibilities and privileges. It may sound a bit abstract, but we have a very similar case in China, which is the gift-giving during the Spring Festival. Chinese sociologists have found that Chinese people have a Spring Festival gift-giving network, a tightly connected private network composed of who to visit and what gifts to give during the New Year. A colleague once said that in his hometown, people often exchange gift boxes during the New Year, but the same few gift boxes circulate among several families and may eventually return to the original owner. This is actually a less institutionalized kula ring. Or rather, the kula is a highly ritualized form of special gift exchange that embodies the basic characteristics of human gift-giving behavior. So, think carefully about the two principles of the kula, which also apply to gift-giving in China. Delay is to allow some time for both parties, making the relationship a long-term one, rather than an immediate settlement. Equivalence is to form a mutually beneficial relationship, not just one-sided charity or dependency. Underneath this, there is also a moral judgment. Generosity is a virtue. If a person knows how to give away valuable possessions, it is considered generous and earns a good reputation. Although generosity may seem like an economic loss in the short term, if you take a long-term view, the return gifts you receive in the future may be even richer. Let's come back to understanding the act of gift-giving. In any culture, it can be summarized in 3 steps: giving, receiving, and reciprocating. The basic purpose is reciprocity, not profit. It may seem that the recipient benefits, but in fact, they have already taken on a future responsibility. There is a Chinese saying, "One who eats another's food becomes soft, and one who takes another's gift feels indebted," which is exactly this principle. This is why people all over the world, whether in primitive tribes or in developed metropolises, enjoy giving gifts. Gift-giving satisfies the most basic need of humans as social animals to establish social connections. It is important to note that the local area does have a barter economy. In fact, kula exchanges are often accompanied by other forms of barter. However, the biggest difference between kula and ordinary transactions is, as mentioned earlier, the highly ritualized nature of the kula ring, which includes many accompanying rituals, magic, and legends. During the kula exchange process, diving for shells involves incantations. Making the canoes for the exchange involves ceremonies. And arriving at another village by boat is even more laden with rituals. There are so many rituals that about half of the book is dedicated to discussing the local people's magic and legends. For example, in the tribe where Mr. Ma lived, they even believed that surrounding tribes had flying witches who could eat people, cause illness, and lead to maritime disasters. Therefore, before setting sail, they would perform rituals to appease these witches, to ward off evil from their canoes, and to ensure a smooth voyage. You might wonder, are they just idle? You may have heard of the theory of the leisure class, which says that the wealthy upper class, in order to prove their status, engage in conspicuous leisure and conspicuous consumption. Mr. Ma's conclusion is different. He said that the tribes that expend a great deal of manpower and resources on these rituals are not doing so for the sake of showing off, but because these rituals and legends form a complete set of shared traditional customs that serve to unite everyone. For example, the book states that the entire Kula exchange process begins with the felling of a tree, not with the launching of the canoe. From the moment a tree is selected for felling, a series of activities will occur in a certain order and sequence, interspersed with much magic, all the way until the fleet of canoes returns. The rules and sequence that regulate these rituals are customs, which are habits and conventions that everyone is accustomed to. The collective activities that take place in accordance with these customs are the rituals of this society. In a society without writing or codified laws, the belief in customs among the indigenous people constitutes a very strong social organizational force. Even without a powerful chief and administrative organization, people will voluntarily participate in various public activities and be very proactive. In collective rituals, everyone performs their tasks according to the established division of labor. Some people work hard to complete their duties, showing off to their peers and earning their praise, while those who are less proactive will be looked down upon. Where does this belief in customs come from? This is where their magic and legends come in, which are the specific forms of their belief. If these rituals are the bones of tribal life, then magic is the flesh. From the perspective of the indigenous people, they chant spells to make wood lighter and boats faster, and there are also evil sorcerers who use spells to harm others, which need to be countered with good spells. For them, magical spells are a channel connecting the supernatural world and our world, capable of bringing benefits, but also potentially becoming a form of punishment. Of course, we must remember that from a scientific standpoint, magic is a superstition. When we talk about the effects of magic here, it is not that chanting a spring spell will make water gush out of the ground, but rather that the indigenous people's belief in magic plays a role at the societal level. We will find that in any society, spells are often unchangeable. The traditional words must be used as they are, representing a force that is not subject to individual will. For example, in Harry Potter, don't the spells also have to be chanted correctly to work? Mr. Ma said that the power of magic is an inherent property of certain words, which are chanted by people who have obtained the right to chant through social tradition and adherence to certain rules, accompanied by certain actions. The key point is, through social tradition and adherence to certain rules, which means that the prerequisite for magic is to follow the rules. The social effect of myths, legends, and magical spells is to make the indigenous people believe, through long-term exposure, that there are supernatural forces beyond the individual that constrain themselves, and that there are rewards and punishments they cannot escape. Alright, when we introduce an external perspective, we can see that the entire Kula process follows certain customs. Various rituals not only mark the completion of certain tasks, and determine the way things are done, but also allow tribal members to confirm each other's contributions to the tribe. The ubiquitous magic and legends help the tribal members form a common moral evaluation system, ensuring that people act in accordance with customs. The author concludes, in every action of tribal life, there first exists the convention prescribed by customs and traditions, then the way of action, and finally the evaluation of behavior in the minds of the indigenous people. Speaking of which, we can further infer that if people no longer believe in these legends, customs will lose their binding power, leading to a breakdown of tradition. In fact, Mr. Ma did observe this trend locally. For example, in 1916, he recorded a celebration for the launching of a Kula canoe, which was a grand event lasting a whole day. The climax of the activity was when everyone brought their family's food to present to the chief, who would then distribute it to everyone. The person who contributed the most food would greatly enhance their social prestige. However, the indigenous people also told him that 3 generations ago, such ceremonies were even more magnificent. They would hold shields and spears, wear gourds with branded patterns, and have nose rings. There would be more canoes launched, and more food presented at the ceremony. The root cause is that the science and technology brought by Europeans, as well as Western religions, have greatly weakened the function of the original customs and beliefs. In the past, there were only canoes between islands. Later, Europeans brought steamships, making navigation much easier. There was no need for the blessing of flying witches to sail quickly, and the celebration of launching canoes lost its significance. Europeans also introduced monogamy, so compared to the past, the food sent by the wives' families on the islands decreased, and thus the food available for showing off at the ceremony also decreased, leading to a reduction in the social prestige that could be gained. The material exchanges that used to be necessary with Kula voyages could later be carried out by regularly arriving fleets and caravans. Other concurrent tribal conflicts and dances also disappeared due to the prohibitions and destruction by colonial governments. The author said, a large number of arm bracelets, many long-awaited practical items, and messages from afar, all of these had more meaning in the past than they do now. As technology and society continue to change, the functions originally served by customs and magic are also being replaced and may eventually disappear, which is a dilemma faced by many traditional cultures in modern times. The book contains much more content, including descriptions of the local matrilineal society, a large number of original spells and legends, as well as details about their living environment, diet, clothing, and even specific activities during celebrations, such as what time certain people should be at certain places in the morning. You will feel that Mr. Ma seems to record everything. Even missionaries who had been there for 30 years said that when they read this book, they would discover many things they had never noticed before. This is also a major characteristic of the book. It covers everything. This book pioneered a new research method that is still popular today and has become the hallmark of the discipline of anthropology, known as scientific fieldwork. Works written using this method are called ethnographies. In fact, when writing this book, Mr. Ma had an ambitious plan to thoroughly reform the academic world. At the very beginning of the book, he said that many books with the label of science give us a lot of conclusions without telling us at all what actual experiences the authors based their conclusions on, which is not scientific at all. Mr. Ma had the confidence to say this. Although he was a master of humanities and social sciences, he initially obtained a Ph.D. in physics, which was the highest honored degree in the Austro-Hungarian Empire. In his view, to ensure that his research withstands scrutiny as scientific research, it is necessary to frankly and openly state all the background conditions and results of the research. Therefore, he spent a great deal of space elaborating on how he believed scientific research should be conducted and proposed 3 principles for conducting fieldwork. First, there must be a genuine scientific purpose. Second, one must always live among the indigenous people and not with people one is already familiar with. And finally, one must employ specific methods for collecting, processing, and organizing evidence. Let's expand on the third point of specific methods. As mentioned earlier, living continuously with the indigenous people not only allows them to become accustomed to one's presence, but also serves the crucial purpose of immersing oneself in the local cultural environment to notice details that are usually overlooked. True objectivity should involve a careful and thorough examination of all aspects of the subject of study, treating mundane details with the same attention as astonishing events, in order to understand the other culture as a whole. In his theory, society is like an organism with various needs, and different parts play different roles to meet those needs. When conducting research, starting with a phenomenon and analyzing its specific functions can lead to a comprehensive understanding of the overall characteristics of the society. The book also introduces a term, the immeasurability of real life, to describe those aspects of our daily lives that cannot be quantified, such as how to take care of one's body, how to eat, the atmosphere during conversations with others, and the aversion to others' vanity, etc. These may seem ordinary to us, but to him they are the greatest treasures because they contain rich emotions and ideas. Why is that? Because only by recording as many details as possible and becoming accustomed to their way of life, can one accurately identify what is normal and what is abnormal. By making this comparison, we can scientifically determine that something, although rare and strange to us, is not a big deal to them. Furthermore, we need to pay attention to what they care about and what they do not care about, what they are passionate about, and what they are indifferent to, that is, the specific emotions under the overarching principles and customs. For example, the indigenous people cherish their kula treasures, but they do not mind giving them away. In fact, when giving gifts, they may act as if the item is of little value, even throwing it on the ground. What they care more about is whether the return gift meets their expectations. Combining these principles, Mr. Ma summarized a three-step specific method. First, construct the framework, that is, to outline the social organization and cultural phenomena of the people being studied, simplify it into a chart, and identify the norms and principles. Second, enrich the content by recording the actual actions and genuine emotions under the principles in a detailed and meticulous manner, through some form of diary, which is the immeasurable material mentioned earlier. The third step, which I call injecting the soul, involves collecting their own views and expressions, as well as various folklore and magical spells, to serve as a textual corpus, finding the emotions corresponding to specific customs and culture, and understanding the actual mindset of the indigenous people. Only by being so comprehensive can we truly see the world through their eyes. But that is still not enough. There is a Chinese poem that says, "We cannot see the true face of Mount Lu, for we are in the midst of its mountains." Mr. Ma also said that people know their own motives, the purposes of their personal actions, and what rules apply to them, but it is not easy to articulate the overall framework beyond the individual. If we are asked what Spring Festival is, we can describe our personal experiences and subjective views of the holiday, but if we are not folklorists, to be able to outline the overall characteristics as mentioned earlier, we need to employ the researcher's external perspective to organize the overall features. In this way, through the cooperation of the indigenous people and the researcher, using the scientific fieldwork method combined with internal and external perspectives, we can write an ethnography that is rich in materials and profound in viewpoints. Having said that, you might wonder, why study these seemingly outdated things? Is it just for fun or to satisfy a curiosity for the exotic? Mr. Ma had a very good answer. He said, "Our ultimate goal is to enrich and deepen our own worldview and understanding of our own nature, making it more perfect in wisdom and art. By comprehending the basic worldview of others with respect and true understanding, even of the indigenous people, we can surely expand our own worldview." Mr. Ma's sentiment stems from his own experiences. He was born in Krakow, which is now part of Poland, but was then under the rule of the Austro-Hungarian Empire. Although his family was well off, they were still on the periphery of the empire. He later went to study anthropology in the UK, focusing on even more marginal cultures. During World War I, which coincided with the time of his research, he was worried that his status as an enemy national would be dangerous in the British colonies. However, in reality, the locals did not care about his nationality at all. Mr. Ma also wrote at the end of the book, "Now, when prejudice, malice, and revenge make all European countries suspicious of each other, and when all the ideals of science and religion, cherished and proclaimed as the highest achievements of civilization, are thrown to the wind, civilized humanity needs this tolerance more than ever before." Therefore, he hoped to transform the science of man and achieve a bias-free social research that clarifies the underlying logic of human society. Mr. Ma's scientific fieldwork, which aims to record everything, appears on the surface to be an effort to rescue disappearing cultures, but more profoundly, it serves to uncover the underlying logic. Understanding others is a means to better understand and improve oneself. Only through comparison can we identify what we have in excess and what we lack, and understand what differences lead to the disparities among people. In an era of rapid development, if we do not step out of our familiar comfort zones, pride can easily turn into arrogance, opinions can easily become prejudices, and traditions and habits can cease to be means of survival and instead become shackles. By understanding the world of others, we gain an additional lens through which to examine ourselves, allowing us to know ourselves better and see alternative possibilities. The best example of the effectiveness of this methodology is Fei Xiaotong. In 1936, he went to the UK and became Mr. Ma's student. Mr. Ma was very enthusiastic about this Chinese student, hoping to learn something from China. Mr. Ma wrote in the preface to Peasant Life in China, "I cannot help but envy their lack of racial prejudice and racial hatred. We Europeans have much to learn from such a moral attitude." However, contrary to expectations, war soon enveloped the world once again. Although Fei Xiaotong's research site was not as remote as Mr. Ma's, he went further academically. Under Mr. Ma's guidance, Fei organized his research findings and wrote Peasant Life in China, with a preface personally written by Mr. Ma. In the preface, he praised Fei for taking a groundbreaking step in the science of man, moving from studying small, technologically backward societies to investigating large, populous, and advanced societies, calling it a milestone in the development of anthropological fieldwork and theoretical work. However, in my view, Fei Xiaotong's greatest contribution to the science of man, founded by this book, is not the difference in research subjects, but the research objectives. Although Mr. Ma called for practical application and guidance of reality, it was limited to abstract understanding and not directly applicable. Fei Xiaotong stated that his goal was to enrich the people. Through this scientific method of social research, he sought a better path for China, which was in crisis in the 1930s, and a better future for millions of Chinese people. Mr. Ma specifically mentioned in the preface to Peasant Life in China that the book contains the results of a citizen's observations of his own people, highlighting that Fei's research was aimed at finding answers for China. In the letter inviting his teacher to write the preface, Fei Xiaotong hoped that Mr. Ma would not only comment on this book, but also stand on the standpoint of Chinese social science to see the future development and promote Mr. Ma's methods and ideas in China. He also mentioned his plan to go to Yunnan to continue in-depth research on Chinese rural areas and sought his teacher's approval. With Mr. Ma's approval for this survey, Fei Xiaotong later wrote Chinese Peasant Life, in which many influences of Mr. Ma can be seen. For example, he emphasized the functions of different customs in Chinese rural society and tried to cover every aspect of rural society, all of which were influenced by this book. So, why is this book from a century ago still valuable today? It is not only because it is a pioneering work in a discipline, but also because it provides a universal and scientific perspective and methodology that have continuously helped people from different eras and regions answer the ultimate questions of knowing oneself and improving oneself. Finally, I would like to quote Fei Xiaotong's evaluation of this book. He said, "After reading Argonauts of the Western Pacific, one sincerely feels that people all over the world share the same heart and live similar lives. One might even wonder, where in the world is the peach blossom spring?" Although we are now in the scientific age and are busy making money, we still can't help but enjoy folk cultures such as deity processions and dragon boat races. From an economic perspective, these rituals seem to have no value and even cost money. Building statues of deities and dragon boats are all costly projects. Why do we like to waste money? It is not because we are superstitious or barbaric, but because these seemingly wasteful activities have always played an important role in human society, providing significant emotional value. Do you remember the story I told at the beginning about Mr. Ma and the cannibals? Our usual notions of civilization and barbarism might be questioned when viewed from a different perspective. Why not, as this book suggests, learn to let go of preconceived notions and try to see the world through others' eyes to better understand ourselves?